So I've been working as a software engineer professionally, working specifically on web applications for the past 5 years, which is terrifying to think about. And what I really want to go through is my entire professional journey all the way to the present day. And maybe you'll be able to learn something from all the struggling and all the mistakes that I made. I do want to preface this by saying that everyone's experience is different and you shouldn't take this as any path of how you should do things. In fact, you should probably take this as a path of how not to do things. 2012 to 2016, my college years. I'm gonna gloss over college because honestly, a lot of it wasn't really that important because I didn't really learn that much. I basically went through an entire regular CS curriculum, all the classes you normally take, how to code, databases, networking, machine learning, operating system, algorithms, stuff like that. But you know what I didn't learn? Anything about web development, which was basically my future career. So in summer of 2015, after my junior year of college, I had an internship. Now, I say internship because that company was basically a bunch of random students who knew nothing about web development, and we were all tasked with creating web applications for clients in the Orange County area. It was an interesting experience, definitely. And when I actually interviewed for the first time, I completely bombed it and was immediately rejected. I was actually asked FizzBuzz, and I couldn't solve it. Yeah, which really showed what kind of student I was. But I remember feeling like I was so screwed because everyone else who was a CS major in their junior year summer had an internship and I had nothing to do in the summer. Out of desperation, I asked for a second chance and I emailed them. And for some reason, they said yes. And I failed again, but they still gave me the job. So that was cool. So anyway, the whole summer we learned how to make web applications in the mean stack, which was like the hot web technology at the time. And basically I learned very little that whole time because I was not good at reading API documentation. And on top of that, I was trying to learn web development without knowing anything about JavaScript, asynchronous programming, HTML, CSS, any of the frameworks, not knowing what the HTTP verbs were, and not even understanding what databases did. And at the end, I built like this small internal tool for people to track their time in and out of the office. And they never used it, probably because it was terrible. And I remember at the end of the internship, when it was over, I told myself, I will never do web development again. What I learned, when you're learning something new for the first time, there's gonna be a huge learning curve. But if you take your time, learn things piece by piece, slowly everything will kind of fall together. What I also learned, if you get rejected from a job, apparently you can ask for a second chance. I mean, sometimes. What I also learned, no one is too dumb for web development. 2016, graduation and unemployment. So again, I didn't really learn that much in college that was useful for jobs outside of college. And so when I graduated, it took me forever to find my first job. And it was a huge mess and a massive struggle. And it was also then I realized, oh, I have to do web development because all of these jobs are for web development. It took me 600 applications to get a job. Let's move on. 2017, slightly less unemployed. So in February of 2017, I was somehow able to trick this company into hiring me. And this was a very, very small startup. If you include the engineering manager and a part-time developer, we had 4 people at the company who could write code. And the company's mission was basically to compete with Cylance or CrowdStrike. Basically, enterprise level, all-inclusive endpoint protection security for an entire company with 4 developers. It was interesting. And when I was brought on, I wasn't really given any task or specific part to work on. They just really needed people who knew how to code. So at the time, I was tasked with some strange Visual C# code in order to create a desktop application. And I was also playing with this strange installer language called NSys because we had to get this product installed onto users' desktops. Yeah, I basically blocked all this out of my memory because the code was extremely boring and I had no idea what I was doing. But at some point, the company pivoted their direction to be much more focused. So instead of an all-inclusive security package, we were just focusing on ransomware only. And probably my first reintroduction into web development ever since my internship was when we decided to go with the package Electron, which allowed us to use web development technologies to write a desktop application. You could use React, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, whatever. This is where I actually started to do some real web development, and I was mostly just tasked with building the UIs out for this desktop application, and it came out looking like this really ugly antivirus software that no one would want sitting on their computer because we didn't have a real designer and the developers were tasked with designing it. And then at some point after this, I was tasked with building out an actual web application, and me and one other developer split the task. He was focused on backend and I was focused on front end. And this is where I learned a lot of my React, HTML, CSS knowledge. I built out a lot of data visualizations with D3 in JavaScript. I made some tables, I made some filters, and I made some styling to make the site look pretty. But at a certain point, our backend developer quit. and he moved to a new company. And I was tasked with supporting the entire site myself. But actually, it was all good. He actually referred me to his new company and I left. What I learned: if you don't have a lot of experience in college, good internships, or just like knowing your leak code fundamentals well, then you'll likely have to suffer through pretty bad jobs while you're gaining experience before you can get a job that you truly like. So this is where I was like freaking kicking myself for not studying harder in college. But just don't do what I did in college. 2018, trial by fire. So I think this is where my actual web development career started, because my previous startup was really run by non-tech people, and all the people doing the engineering work were just new grads. And we tried our best, but I mean, we don't know the best ways to do everything. But this new startup actually had a super legit product using machine learning and like satellite imagery. And they also had this really complicated, highly scalable microservice architecture to deal with the huge amounts of data that were coming into their product. I was in way over my head, and how little I truly understood web development. Let's move on. And at this point, I didn't have any back-end programming knowledge. And one of my first tasks at that company was to build a highly scalable system that users could input responses to, basically to like fix data sets for machine learning. It needed to be highly scalable, have consensus rules, needed to allow for I was fucking stressed out. I was so stressed all the time. And anytime I was confused and decided to ask questions, I would literally get more confused because I couldn't understand what people were telling me. Every day was a struggle at that time. And there's no real deadline for the project. The deadline was just ASAP, which in theory sounds great, but to be honest, this always made me feel like I was behind. I will always remember this quote. Kevin says that if this isn't released by next week, he's gonna jump off a cliff. And I somehow had to release this horribly buggy microservice and the UI. Basically everything was broken, and I spent months trying to iron out all the bugs in that service. But anyways, the next major project I worked on was basically like a redesign of the dashboard to visualize data. And it was actually really fun. Stressful, but less stressful than before. So it involved heavy data visualization with charts that I could have created custom ones with D3 and JavaScript like I did in my previous company. But I was like, nah, I just imported an NPM library and called it a day. I learned a ton about debugging and just general backend development, really. And the rest of my time was just spent on random features. What I learned: joining a startup was a true trial by fire experience. Except instead of just walking through a fire, it was like being thrown into the middle of a lava pit, and you're being told to survive the lava, learn how to swim, and make it back to shore, all at the same time. I spent about 2.5 years there, but I felt like every month I was there was basically equivalent to my entire college education. Like, the amount I was learning was insane. I got good at backend development and writing SQL queries. I got exposure to Kubernetes, Docker, RabbitMQ, all three major cloud providers. So what are the takeaways? If you like learning a lot, then a startup is probably for you, as long as you don't mind that you might be taking years off your life in stress. But also, maybe you're just kind of built different than me, I don't know. One of my coworkers thrived in that environment. He loved every moment of it. So 2019, repeating college. So 2019 is basically where I started to do tons of leak code and trying to get into a top tech company and studying a lot of computer science fundamentals, basically all the stuff I should have been doing in college. Yeah, anyways, I detail everything here. It was truly just a year of leak code, whatever. 2020, success? And then in August of 2020, I finally got and started my job at Intuit, where I'm still here to this day. But basically, I've just been working on TurboTax. I worked on TurboTax.com, and I also worked on, wait. Do you guys remember this on Netflix? Which was The Patriot Act by Hassan Minhaj? So funny enough, I actually watched this show before I joined Intuit. And crazy enough, this screen right here was basically what I worked on the whole time I was here. So you use TurboTax, you're welcome. What I learned. So you know how I said my previous startup was trial by lava pit? Yeah, so it's pretty much the exact opposite here. Things are done very slowly, there's very little stress, and in turn, there's not that much learning. I think my whole professional journey can be described in 2 words: mediocrity and stress. I learned that there's jobs out there where the work is incredibly easy, and there's jobs out there where the work is incredibly hard. And if there's one thing I wish I could have told my past self, it would be to just be calm. So much of my career was me worrying that I was gonna fall back into that deep abyss of that time when I was unemployed. But I think just relaxing and trying to stress out a little bit less would have made this whole process a little bit easier.